This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
Joining us on Synthesis TV today is Archie Arukal. She is a practice lead at Synthesis Intelligent Data. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you for asking. All right. But the one thing that's perplexing me is this hysteria around Elon Musk and Twitter. What is the fuss? What am I missing?
Essentially, what Elon is trying to do is just buy our freedom back on Twitter, right? Because
don't we have freedom on Twitter?
Apparently not, because there are several algorithms that are filtering out our content. Everything is censored. People are banned. There's actual keywords that are being removed off Twitter at the moment as we speak. Yep.
That is interesting. Do we know what they are?
Okay, I don't know what they are.
Come on.
I'm sorry.
Come on, that would be awesome. No, listen, I understand a group of people getting together in a basement and deciding that Donald Trump is no good and we're throwing him off Twitter. Howard Feldman, terrible news, bad speller, get rid of him. Those are human decisions. But what I don't understand is why some of the tweets that I tweet might be well read and shared, and all of a sudden I've got all of these high numbers, and some of them, which I think might be quite funny or clever, go absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
How does it work?
So it's all a numbers game at the end of the day, right?
Okay.
The more people that share your tweet, the more people that like your tweet, and eventually there's a whole mass effect behind it where the more value that has been attributed to your tweet, the more it gets spread around the entire Twitterverse.
Okay.
And then as a result of that, if you
Twitterverse is not a thing, is it? Please say it's not a thing.
It's a thing.
Horrible
it's a thing.
word.
It's a Twitterverse is a thing. Let's
okay.
call it.
All right, I'm going to accept that. Let's move on.
Let's take
right.
it. But essentially, the more value that has been attributed to a particular tweet, the more it gets promoted on the Twitterverse side of things.
Okay. So there's almost like this algorithm rating system.
Yes, and sometimes it's even a little bit more than just the number of tweets. I mean, number of reshares, etc. It's also depending on the location that you're based at. What is the most topical conversation
well, that makes
there?
sense. So today, Roe versus Wade in the United States is a massive conversation.
Yes.
Zondo here in South Africa could be, or Eskom, load shedding, massive conversation.
Exactly.
So it depends on location as well.
Exactly. It depends on location, depends on who's tweeting what in that area, what's the numbers game behind it. For example, let's say you tweeted something about load shedding today, it only gets 2 shares, but someone else gets 10 shares. Because you're under the bracket of load shedding, your tweet will probably be promoted as a result of that. So it's a combination of a few factors. Tweets and reshares are definitely one of the biggest ones, but it also depends on where you are, who you are as a tweeter on the platform as well.
Right. So in terms of an Elon Musk, what is the concern? Is he going to change those algorithms? Is he going to, what is the issue there?
So I've obviously read about this and we've had like intense debates about it. Essentially, the main thing he's trying to do is prevent people from getting banned and trying to remove any sort of censorship on the Twitter platform. Because what he believes is that by having these censorships, you're actually like preventing people from having freedom of speech, and it's the one area where you could actually truly represent democracy as well in that space.
Doesn't the law already account for that? In other words, if I tweet something in South Africa that is racist or that is classified as hate speech, there is the ability to prosecute me for that.
Yes.
So therefore, doesn't the law in any event in any particular country deal with that already?
It does, but it's not fast enough. So, that's exactly it, right? Twitter, all these social media platforms, information is moving so quickly. There isn't enough compute in the world that can process everything fast enough. So you do need to have something that's a little bit more technologically friendly and agile as well, that can compete with the same speed.
Right. And essentially that's why Facebook has got themselves into trouble as well, because the growth of the company, the demand hasn't been able to keep up with some of these nuances.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is with Facebook specifically is only now is it getting to a point where people are questioning the privacy and the data security angles, whereas they used to do the same things 10 years ago, but it didn't really catch the light either. Yeah.
Right. What about fake news? Should that be censored? How does that work? If I share an article that my mother-in-law has sent me, most likely fake, and you reshare it and somebody else does, does that then get weighted in the same way as something that's truthful.
Yes, and that's exactly the flaw behind the algorithm, right? Because the algorithm isn't actually censoring or checking the sources that is being shared.
Right.
It's just looking at the network effect. It's looking at the people that it's sharing. It's looking at the number of people that it's sharing, looking at the number of how much traction it's getting, location it is, the hashtags. That's what it's looking at. It's not looking at the validity of the data itself.
Okay, tell me about some of your research into fake news.
So last year or the year before, I can't remember when, but we tried to track down where the fake news is actually being spread. We tried to see how quickly fake news is actually spread. And what we found was, firstly, which is quite scary, don't quote me on this, but this is what we saw with the data that from the back then, like 76% of data that is on Twitter is fake news.
I thought you were going to name my mother-in-law. Whew, I'm actually so relieved. Right, sorry. What percentage?
76% of data on Twitter is fake news, because that's how quickly fake news gets spread around.
Wow.
And fake news travels 15 times faster than real news, because real news takes at least 3 weeks to actually
Because
validate.
real news is normally boring, right? It's the fake news that's interesting.
Well, that
because
is,
it's outrageous.
Yeah, exactly.
It moves us emotionally. It outrages us. It shocks us, and then we quickly want to share it.
Exactly. And it's like, I mean, that's the whole effect of social media as well, right? Sharing the pretty and then the things that cause the most like emotion in people. Yeah.
Is that changing?
I'd like to say it is, but it's not.
So we really still are very, very susceptible to fake news.
Yep. And I think, being in lockdown, being sitting at home, seeing life through the lenses of social media has just propagated that even more, because now we don't actually have a sense check on reality as much as we used to, which is quite scary. We weren't really in a very good place back then either, but now it's even worse because now that's our new lens on reality.
Wow, that's a scary thought. What about labeling things as suspect or unproven? Is that a decent alternative to what we're dealing with?
I think obviously education is always the best approach in this situation, scrutinizing what it is so yes, you can label things, but what's to say that same label is going to carry forward?
Of course.
Right.
Yeah,
so you can't really do that. So essentially comes down to education. The one thing I am seeing, with the whole WhatsApp debacle where the privacy standards needed to be, you need to click on agree to actually accept that your data can be processed further. That caused a huge, there was like a huge thing behind it. Right. And that's essentially what gave me a little bit of hope in terms of how data is actually being kept, because people are now starting to scrutinize that, which is great. So scrutinize your data. Scrutinize the information you're actually consuming, because that's essentially what it comes down to.
Yeah, it is fascinating that we, that we need. We reacted then, but in fact we've been sharing all of our information and all sorts of things on Instagram, on Facebook, on everything else, way ahead of that. Absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. It's a conversation we can have for hours. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Archie, thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
On Synthesis TV. Welcome back to Synthesis TV. We hear a lot about cloud, we hear a lot about cloud enablement, but I never really understand what the advantage is to a company. Is it financial? Is it efficiency? What would the reason be that any company would look to move their business into the cloud? Nasim Ahmed is part of cloud enablement at Synthesis Software. How are you?
Hello, Howard. I'm well. How are you doing?
So I believe it's a real tradition within the cloud team at Synthesis to begin any session with a dad joke.
It's not the cloud team, it's at Synthesis.
Oh, it's in general.
General.
Oh, gosh.
So
Okay.
just to let you know, I live out on a farm and I was having trouble with the Wi-Fi. So I moved it out to the barn and now I have stable Wi-Fi.
You see, and this is why we probably shouldn't get involved in any of this. Either way, the move to cloud, it's obviously everybody's doing it. It's the latest. It's like, I don't know, ice baths that all the cool kids are doing. But is it an important thing from a business to have a look at moving their environment to a cloud?
So at present, as in if anybody's deciding they want to build infrastructure on-prem, that will be a very sad decision. I mean, if you consider...
Prem as in premises.
premises. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
You're talking to somebody who isn't.
Isn't there?
Yeah. Up
Okay.
there.
So if you're trying to build something that's in a data center on premise,
On your environment.
yes,
in
on
your
your,
environment.
in your own environment,
Huge
when
mistake.
It's a very huge mistake, and the reason is if you look at our current problems we face, as in just the shipping backlogs that the world has. How do you get your infrastructure, the server that you order, the hard drive? Those things have got a very, very long delay just to get them into your environment.
Right.
Cloud can solve that problem for you. You don't need to procure those type of things.
So to some extent, you're outsourcing a massive capability. And because it's a capability that you're outsourcing to people who know what they're doing, you get advantages along the way.
Yeah, you get lots of advantages. I mean, you don't need to worry about managing a data center.
Right.
You don't need to manage. The one question that people have is, why do we want to move to the cloud, right? And is it purely for cost? Many companies say the reason we move to cloud is to save cost. And if the only reason that you have to move to cloud is for cost, you're going to fail.
So it's not about cost only.
If the only metric to measure if you're getting somewhere is how much you save, then you are going to fail.
So what are the advantages?
So cost is one of the many advantages or the drivers that will cause you to want to move to the cloud. Other advantages is, let's say you have to do a data center refresh. What normally happens in data centers is every 3 years you need to replace infrastructure. Right. That's what happens because you normally have a 3 to 5 year cycle.
Right.
And those things have to be replaced. If you're going to be replacing and you move into cloud, that's one of the reasons. If you want to have the advantage of newer infrastructure, newer services, AI, machine learning, all of these fancy tools, you can't build that on-prem. It's just too complicated.
What you're talking about to some extent is almost an ideal world where somebody is looking to say, right, I need to develop this. I can either be on-prem or I can go to the cloud. But the reality is most businesses have legacy issues and legacy systems that they've been working with. I would imagine that complicates matters.
That does complicate matters. But if you have a legacy system 10, 15 years old and you're not looking at trying to improve it or modernize it, for starters, the first problem you're going to have, you're not going to find anybody to manage that software.
Right.
You're not going to find, I've seen systems that are running on Windows 2003. Microsoft doesn't support.
I don't.
Just make sure you don't do that. But Microsoft doesn't support those operating systems. So if that machine, that server has to die today, there's nothing you can do. You are completely stuck.
A real problem.
And there's many organizations that are out there that are running on very old software where you don't have the source code, you don't have developers. I mean, as an example, I don't know if you're familiar with COBOL. Probably back in your day. That there was a language called COBOL.
Right.
In the States, there's actually a support group for COBOL. Only you need to be like over 70 or 75 to join it. And then they outsource their services to.
So it's actually a real risk for a company.
It's a very, very big risk. If you do not modernize your application, it has to move with the times. Otherwise, you get stuck.
So what are the steps that somebody needs to take? They trying now to look at their business. They say, right, we've definitely got a risk factor here. We want to modernize. We want to move to the cloud. We do have legacy systems. What are the steps that they need to take?
So the first is, what are the reasons why you want to adopt?
Right.
You have to be very clear on that. That the reason why you need to be clear so you can measure whether or not you're actually getting somewhere, right? And the reason.
So in fact, you define your own goals, your measurables, and then your priorities, and you work towards those.
And you cannot, the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Especially if you're looking at an organization and you're looking at the IT infrastructure, it's a lot. It's many years of work that people have put together to get that stuff. You're not going to do it overnight. So you have to have a reasonable time.
And I don't even
frame.
think they're kosher. If I'm not mistaken,
Elephants
are not halal either.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. Neither of us actually particularly clued up on that. Not that I've ever looked into it, but the metaphor's there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You have to try that very, very slowly. And it has to be focused. And the way that you do these type of things is you choose a workload, an application, single, and then you start. But you have to start.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Just start.
Yeah, just start.
Very, very interesting. Nasim Ahmed from Cloud Enablement at Synthesis, talking to me on Synthesis TV. Thank you. Welcome back to Synthesis TV. Joining me in the studio today, Dricus van der Walt. He is part of cloud disruption, enablement, all sorts of very, very strange things, which mean very, very little to some of us who aren't on the technological bent. I don't know. Either way, we wanted to talk about large companies. Can they fail? Can the Googles of this world fail if they don't keep up with the right technology? Before we get involved, Dricus, good afternoon. How are you?
Good, and yourself, Howard?
I believe that you would tell a really, really bad dad joke.
I tell the worst.
The worst is what I've heard.
Jokes.
I don't want to say the worst because there surely would be somebody worse, but maybe not.
No, I'm the worst. So I recently married a scientist, geneticist. So my joke is a bit more on the sciencey side rather than technology, reaching a wider audience. So my pet frog came to me the other day and said, my talking pet frog, obviously. Said it wanted to find out about its heritage. So we went for a DNA test and we found out it was 50% Welsh, 30% English, and a tadpole.
Bring me that wall so I can smash my head against it. Either way, you might actually be the worst. It's
a title
it
I'm
really
proud
is.
of.
Okay, so let's just talk about this. When we talk about companies failing because of technology, what does that actually mean? You know, the Googles, they defined technology for us, for the layperson, really, in many ways, didn't they?
Yeah, so there are trends and cycles of technology. And what I measure as a company failing is maybe not keeping up with those trends and not moving along with the newest source of technology. So, maybe a couple of years ago, before I was even born, the pinnacle of technology was telecoms. Phone calls was the pinnacle, and then you had internet, and then you had mobile internet. And if you don't keep up with those changes, I would consider that as a failure.
Right. So explain to me about the vulnerability of some of the companies that you've looked at.
So if you look at a company like Google, as you mentioned earlier, yes, they have been the trendsetters. They have been pushing the boundary as far as internet searches, and even now in AI technology, they are still pushing the trends. But now you have new trends coming up in augmented virtual reality, blockchain technology, Web3. I can keep throwing buzzwords if you want.
I'm loving it, yeah.
But the point there being that, yes, they have been the pinnacle, but there are new technologies coming up. And can Google integrate blockchain into their offerings? Can they keep pushing the trends of AI, which they have been doing successfully so far? The question is, what's around the corner? We don't know what the next revolutionary technology is.
We've seen, obviously, in the past, we've seen companies like Kodak who knew that the digital camera was around the corner. Actually, they did research and saw it was 10 years away, and they didn't adopt. They didn't move in that direction. Are any of these companies at risk of becoming maybe a little bit too complacent and self-focused? In other words, this is who we are, not looking at what the demand really is.
Yeah, I think there is a big risk there. I think when it comes to failing, if we use that word, and what that means is debatable. But there are internal and external conflicts. So the internal conflict is being too self-centric, not focusing on your current offering instead of the future offerings. And the external threat is competition. So if you think about maybe a big car company, they are focusing on their cars, but then there's a threat of something like Uber completely dominating even the need for a car.
Right, yeah. And you've looked at which companies, or how have you looked at this?
So what I've been looking at is not individual companies, but rather trends across companies. So there's something called the S&P 500. It's an index, and it tracks the 500 biggest companies in America by market cap, the 500 wealthiest companies. And you can see a trend of the median age, or the average age, depending on what you want to use, is busy reducing. So in 1964, the average age of a company was 33 years in that bucket of 500.
Right.
In 2016, it went down to 24 years, and it's projected by McKinsey that it will go down to 12 years by 2027. There's a churn rate of 5%, which means every year, 5% of those companies fall out and new ones come in. And
what does that tell us?
That tells us that there's a big shift, there's a disruption, and there's volatility in these companies. Just because you're big, just because you're one of the 500 biggest, doesn't mean you will be. We're looking at unicorns coming in with these massive evaluations that are shifting them, mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of capital to invest in these new technologies. So what does that mean to us? It means that times are changing, companies are changing, technology is changing. And just because you're big doesn't mean you will be big forever. Just because you have a good product, have a good identity, have a good brand, doesn't mean you're safe if you don't adapt to the change and to the disruption.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Driekus van der Walt. I'm Howard Feldman for Synthesis TV.